We present a comparative evaluation of interventions against misinformation, augmenting the WHO checklist. My name is Hendrik Heuer, and this is joint work with Elena Glassman. The COVID-19 pandemic is a prime example of the contemporary abundance of misinformation. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, the WHO, among others, warned that misinformation costs lives. Like Wardle et al., we operationalize misinformation as false information, including false connections and misleading content. There's a large body of research on why people are prone to believe in misinformation, on how to study the spread of misinformation, and on which approaches help against misinformation. There are also a number of interventions against misinformation, including reminders that shift users' attention to accuracy and novel user interface items like warnings, related articles, and other interface changes. With this paper, we address the gap regarding research that compares perceived and actual helpfulness of different approaches, especially for the setting where users review more than the headlines of articles. To support people, the WHO released a checklist. The checklist includes 7 items relevant to identifying misinformation. Assess the source, go beyond the headline, identify the author, check the date, examine the supporting evidence, fact-check your biases, and turn to fact-checkers. In our paper, we evaluate this checklist in experiments in Germany and the United States. We also compare it to an interactive version that we developed. This interactive checklist reduces the effort to follow the recommendations on the checklist. For instance, the Assess the Source component provides an assessment of whether a source is reliable or not. Evidence from a number of websites and online forums is combined. Since the interactive checklist provides this information in the user interface, the effort for users is reduced. The tool also automatically retrieves information like the headline, the name of the author, and the date on which the article was published. The most elaborate technical support is provided by the Turn to Fact Checkers component. For this, we developed a custom Google search form and automatically pre-filled it with relevant keywords. The search was limited to known fact-checking sites. Here again, the laborious process of visiting different fact-checking sites is replaced. We performed 2 independent studies with different news articles in Germany and the United States of America. We recruited a sample that is diverse in terms of age, political stance, and education. Participants rated 4 articles per intervention. After rating all 12 news articles and after evaluating all 3 interventions, participants were surveyed about the components of the checklist. The figure shows the perceived helpfulness ratings of the 3 different interventions. Across both countries, we can observe a monotonic increase in the perceived helpfulness. To understand whether the checklist helped people provide correct article ratings, we ran a linear mixed model analysis. We included the information on whether a participant provided the correct answer as a dependent variable, and added random effects of the news article that was rated and the participant that rated the article. We added fixed effects of a participant's education, political stance, age, and country. The linear mixed model analysis shows that the interactive checklist has a strong positive effect on whether participants provided correct article ratings. We also find moderate effects of education, age, and country. In addition to that, we investigated whether participants perceived it as helpful that they were reminded of the different components of the interactive checklist. We find that reminding users about the Assessing the Source component is perceived as most helpful. In Germany, the reminder to turn to fact-checkers is perceived as the least helpful component. In the United States, it is second to last. We also examined which of the components users reported acting on. The Assessing the Source component is the one that most people acted on. In Germany, turning to fact-checkers is the least frequently acted on component. In the US, it again is second to last before identifying the author. Participants also rated how helpful they perceived acting on the 5 components that we augmented. In both experiments, acting on the assessing the source component is perceived as most useful. In the paper, we thoroughly investigate the correlations between the different ratings and task performance. We find that the technically most sophisticated turn to fact checkers component from the checklist that you see on the left was perceived as less helpful and was acted on far less than simpler components like assess the source. One explanation for this could be that the component was presented as the last item in the checklist. The result could also be explained by user fatigue. Users may also have perceived the recommendation as less helpful because they might already know that fact checkers can help. This, however, does not explain why the recommendation is not acted on. Another possible reason is that fact-checking requires a lot of time and effort. A user has to deeply engage with an article to be able to find and comprehend fact-checking information. This could entail a significant time commitment and require a lot of cognitive effort from the user. Finally, for fact checks to be helpful, articles that present an opposing point of view need to exist. For the articles that we reviewed, this was not always the case. For the context of the audit checklist provided by the WHO, we find that the assess the source component that you see on the left is acted on the most, and acting on the component is perceived as most helpful. In-depth correlation analysis that you find in the paper also indicates that acting on the assess the source component has an effect on task performance in Germany. We identify a number of reasons for this. First and foremost, parsing source labels requires significantly less time than skimming or reading an article or performing a fact check. Second, in addition to the time requirement, the cognitive effort associated with understanding a source label could also be significantly lower than that for alternatives like turning to fact checkers. Third, the source labels can be easily integrated into existing user interfaces, both by those who operate a platform as well as by providers of third-party browser extensions. Fourth, there are existing and established jury processes that can be used to determine whether a news source is reliable or not. The most important finding is that users can be supported in the fight against misinformation. We also show that interactive elements can increase the effectiveness of the checklist components. Our most important design recommendation is that online platforms should add source labels. We encourage providers of platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, and TikTok to add democratically and transparently determined source labels to online platforms.